Tuesday, 2026-04-14. Think about the last time you made a major life decision. You probably weighed the options, looked at your past, projected into the future, and, felt this deep, comforting sense of certainty about what was going to happen next.
Right, that feeling of having it all figured out.
Exactly. Well, today's deep dive is going to take that exact feeling of certainty, put it under a microscope, and basically just systematically dismantle it.
Yeah, we are. We're going to tear it down.
We are, because our mission today is to explore a truly extraordinary essay titled Epistemocracy, a Dream. And we're mapping the absolute limits of human knowledge. We're going to get into how our brains are biologically wired to deceive us about the past, how we are functionally blind to the future, and honestly, the rare psychological courage it takes to admit you have no idea what's going on.
Which is harder to do than it sounds.
Yeah. Way harder. By the time we wrap up our conversation today, you are going to rethink everything. I mean, from how you plan your next big financial purchase to how you remember your childhood, down to how you perceive like an ice cube melting on a table.
Yeah, the premise we're dealing with today is fundamentally unsettling, but it's also deeply liberating once you actually lean into it. And to get us into the right, the psychological space for this, I've set up a specific visual environment today.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. For those of you listening, the visual backdrop behind our expert right now is incredibly striking. When we first sat down, it looked like this bustling, overwhelming cocktail party. People packed shoulder to shoulder, mouths moving a mile a minute. It was this perfect visual representation of loud, modern, performative certainty.
Right, everyone's shouting their opinions.
Exactly. But over the last few minutes, it's been slowly fading out. The people are vanishing, the ambient noise is dropping, and the room is dissolving into this quiet 16th century stone study surrounded by rolling hills.
We're stripping away the noise of modern epistemic arrogance to find the quiet isolation of epistemic humility. That transition from the chaotic certainty of the cocktail party to the solitary doubt of the stone tower is exactly the intellectual journey we need to take today.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting right in the middle of that cocktail party. We are introduced immediately to a brutal contrast between two ways of existing in the world. You've got epistemic arrogance on one side and epistemic humility on the other.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, imagine a deeply introspective, hesitant person at that crowded social gathering. They are essentially a ghost. Society does not, throw its weight behind people who suspend judgment.
No, not at all. We don't hand microphones to the person quietly sipping their drink, running through the infinite complexities of some political issue. We hand the microphone to the loudest, most definitive voice in the room.
Always. But we are looking at a different kind of character today, someone the source material defines as an epistemocrat.
Right, the epistemocrat. It's a fascinating psychological profile because this is a person who is heavily introspective to the point where it basically becomes a burden. They lack what is brilliantly referred to as the courage of the idiot.
The courage of the idiot. I love that phrase.
It's so good. The courage of the idiot is that blind, frictionless forward momentum you get when you just don't know enough about a subject to realize how complicated it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
The epistemocrat, conversely, possesses a much rarer, much more difficult kind of guts. I mean, they have the fortitude to look at a complex system and say, I don't know.
And it's not just a casual, dismissive, I don't know, right?
Yeah, no.
They agonize over the consequences of being wrong. They introspect until they literally hit physical and nervous exhaustion. They are entirely willing to look like an ignoramus to the rest of the people at the cocktail party because their loyalty is to the truth, not to, social perception.
And the mechanics of this mindset are crucial to understand. The epistemocrat does not necessarily suffer from low self-esteem or a general lack of confidence. It's a highly specific, deep-seated suspicion of their own cognitive machinery.
Their own brain.
Exactly. They look at human perception, they look at their own brain, and they recognize it as a flawed instrument. They know this instrument is prone to biases, emotional interference, blind spots. Therefore, they treat the outputs of this machine, their own beliefs, their own certainties, with extreme caution.
While society functions on the exact opposite principle.
Precisely. Society rewards the quick answer and the decisive action, completely, regardless of whether the foundational premises are sound.
Yeah.
The epistemocrat represents the intellectual value of true, agonizing hesitation.
It is so easy to see how this plays out in the modern corporate environment. I mean, think about a standard high-stakes office meeting. You always have that one notoriously confident, loud colleague. Let's call them the assertive idiot.
We all know one.
We really do. They're at the whiteboard, tapping it aggressively with a marker, making sweeping, definitive predictions about the market or a new product launch. And they are consistently wrong. The data proves them wrong, quarter after quarter. But because they project absolute, unyielding certainty, they act as an anchor for everyone else's anxiety.
Yeah.
So they keep getting promoted, they get the larger budget. Meanwhile, you have the quiet, brilliant team member sitting in the corner of the room. They've actually run the numbers, they see all the confounding variables and systemic risks, and they are terrified of making a definitive claim because they respect the complexity of the problem.
Yeah, they stay quiet.
They stay quiet and they get passed over. So it raises a serious question. Is society literally wired to punish the epistemocrat?
From a sociological and evolutionary perspective, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Group dynamics heavily favor the illusion of certainty over the reality of complexity. When a collective is facing the unknown, baseline anxiety spikes.
Right, people get scared.
Exactly. And the assertive idiot functions as a highly effective anxiety reduction mechanism. When someone stands up and says, "Follow me, I know exactly what to do," the psychological relief within the group is immediate. It's intoxicating.
Even if they're wrong.
Even if that confident leader is marching the group directly into a systemic collapse. The short-term comfort of having a definitive direction overrides critical analysis. The epistemocrat, by pointing out the fog, the unseen cliffs, the limits of the data, they actually increase the group's cognitive load and anxiety.
And nobody wants to be made to feel more anxious.
No. People generally do not reward those who make them feel anxious, even if that anxiety is entirely justified.
That dynamic is incredibly frustrating to recognize because you see it everywhere. Politics, media, finance. It makes you wonder how anyone with an epistemocratic mindset survives without being entirely marginalized. But we are told that to find the ultimate shining example of this rare personality type, we have to pull back from the modern world entirely.
Right.
We have to travel to 16th century France.
Yeah, we have to look at the life and the incredibly unique mind of Michel de Montaigne. He's the occupant of the stone study you see forming behind me.
And the biography of Montaigne provides such a vivid context for his mindset. At the age of 38, which even in the 1500s is quite early to simply walk away from a lucrative public career, he retires to his family estate in the countryside of southwestern France.
The estate is literally named Montaigne, which
Right.
derives from the word for mountain.
Right. Now, today, if you mention that region of Bordeaux, people immediately think of like high-end wine culture.
Right.
But back then, sophisticated intellectuals were not pouring their analytical energy into tasting notes. Montaigne had strong stoic leanings, so he wasn't retreating just to live a life of hedonistic leisure. He retreated to engage in a very specific intellectual project. He wanted to write a collection of what he called attempts. And that linguistic choice is profoundly important, isn't it?
Oh, it's massive. He literally coined the word essay.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's one of the most significant etymological developments in literary history. The French verb essayer translates to try, to attempt, or to test. When Montaigne applied the term essay to his writings, he was establishing a massive epistemological boundary.
Setting expectations.
Exactly. He was explicitly stating that his writings were not definitive treatises, they were not declarations of absolute truth, nor were they rigorous theological doctrines. An essay, in its purest original form, is tentative. It's speculative.
It's just a guy trying to figure something out.
Yes, it is a public display of a mind wrestling with a subject, fully acknowledging that it might fail to pin it down. Every time Montaigne picked up his pen, he was signaling to the reader, "I'm going to attempt to map my thoughts on this matter, but I offer no guarantees of arriving at a final destination."
And his physical environment was a direct reflection of this internal philosophy. He converted a tower on his estate into his personal study. The walls and wooden beams of this tower were heavily inscribed with quotes in Greek and Latin, almost all of them referencing the vulnerability, frailty, and profound limits of human knowledge.
Right.
He worked surrounded by these carved reminders of his own ignorance. And the windows of this tower looked out over the vast, sweeping hills of Bordeaux. He's sitting in this elevated, isolated space, explicitly exploring the subject he knew best, which was himself.
But it is vital to distinguish his self-exploration from modern vanity.
Right, he wasn't writing a self-help book or a memoir about how great he was.
No, not at all. He wasn't a modern executive writing a bloated autobiography to highlight his brilliant strategic victories. He was dissecting his own mind, his own absurdities, to find the universal threads of human nature. His own mind was his laboratory.
And the experiments he ran in that laboratory were wonderfully idiosyncratic. I mean, he refused to be constrained by what the academic elite of his time considered worthy subjects of philosophical inquiry.
Idiosyncratic is the perfect word.
Because he would sit in that tower and genuinely wonder about the most bizarre things. For instance, pondering whether cripples possessed more vigorous libidos because there was theoretically a richer circulation of blood bypassing their atrophied legs and going to their sexual organs.
Which is a wild thought.
It sounds totally absurd to us, but it demonstrates a mind that is relentlessly, intensely curious about the physical, messy reality of human biology and behavior.
Yeah.
He was anchored by a central philosophical quote from the Latin poet Terence, which was prominent in his study. Homo sum, humani a me nil alienum puto, which means, I am a man and nothing human is foreign to me.
That quote encapsulates his entire worldview.
Yeah.
But to truly grasp why Montaigne represents the zenith of the epistemocratic ideal, we have to look closely at his professional background. He was not an academic. He didn't spend his formative years cloistered in the sterile, highly theoretical halls of the Sorbonne, debating abstract theological points. Montaigne was a doer. He served as a magistrate. He was a businessman. He was a mayor of Bordeaux during periods of extreme political and religious violence.
So he saw real life. Real ugly human nature.
Yes, he dealt with plagues, legal disputes, human greed and irrationality on a daily basis. He saw firsthand how poorly abstract theories hold up when applied to terrified, selfish human beings. His philosophy wasn't born in an armchair. He famously noted that his best ideas came to him while he was out riding his horse.
That physical grounding changes the entire flavor of his philosophy. He isn't building pristine, abstract castles in the sky. He's observing the mud on the ground and trying to figure out how to walk through it without slipping.
Which naturally led him to adopt what we call Pyrrhonian skepticism.
Okay, what is that?
It's a very specific disciplined form of philosophical doubt that traces its roots back to ancient thinkers like Sextus Empiricus. Pyrrhonian skepticism is strictly anti-dogmatic.
Meaning no rigid rules.
Right. It's not the kind of performative, cynical doubting that simply tears everything down for the sake of being edgy. It's the active, rigorous practice of suspending judgment. When a Pyrrhonian skeptic observes how consistently humans misinterpret data, how heavily we are influenced by transient emotions, and how deeply flawed our sensory inputs are, the only logically sound position is to withhold absolute assent. You refuse to lock in on a definitive truth.
Okay, here is where this concept collides aggressively with how you and I are taught to think today. Because modern education, modern business, modern science, they all place a massive, almost religious emphasis on strict rationality.
Yeah, you do.
We are constantly told that if we just acquire enough data, apply enough rigorous logic, and strip away our biases, we can calculate the correct answer to any problem. But reading Montaigne flips that entirely. He fully accepted human weakness. He knew that any system of thought that requires humans to be perfectly rational is doomed to fail because humans are decidedly not rational.
Not even close.
And it is actually argued in the text that the scholars and philosophers who came after Montaigne, the ones who championed pure, unadulterated reason, were the backward ones. So why is that? Why is building a philosophy around our messy, ingrained flaws considered a superior, more advanced form of logic than striving for pure rationality?
It really comes down to the fundamental engineering of a system. Think about it. Pure rationality assumes a frictionless environment. It builds models based on the assumption that humans are capable of processing all available variables objectively, without fatigue, without ego, and without neurochemical interference.
Which is impossible.
Completely. But Montaigne, because he had been a mayor and a magistrate, knew that this frictionless human does not exist. We are constantly tired, we are highly emotional, we are deeply biased by our social conditioning, our judgments fluctuate based on our blood sugar levels, and we are easily fooled by superficial appearances. So if you design a political philosophy or an economic model that relies on pure rationality to function, that system's structurally fragile. The moment it makes contact with actual irrational human behavior, it shatters.
It is the equivalent of designing an airplane that can only fly in a total vacuum and then acting surprised when it crashes the moment it hits real-world turbulence.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. Montaigne's approach is superior because it builds the turbulence directly into the aerodynamic model. By accepting our cognitive flaws up front, by explicitly stating, my logic is limited, my perception is heavily distorted, you create a much more resilient intellectual framework.
You're anticipating the failure.
Yes. You automatically build in massive safety margins. You become far less likely to commit catastrophic systemic errors because you never fully blindly trust your own conclusions. You intentionally leave room for doubt, for rapid revision, and for the unexpected. The rationalists who dominated later centuries, who arrogantly believed the human mind could perfectly decode the universe, were backward because they ignored the biological reality of the very instrument they were using to do the decoding.
The rationalist believes they are looking at the world through a perfectly transparent window. But Montaigne knows the window is smudged, warped, and cracked, and he factors the distortion of the glass into everything he observes.
Exactly.
So if Montaigne is the template for this mindset on an individual level, we then scale this idea up to a societal level. And that brings us to the author's vision of a utopia, which is termed an epistemocracy.
Utopian visions are always revealing, aren't they? Some people dream of a society with universal, unbending justice. Others dream of a world entirely free from manual labor.
There is a humorous note in the text that for some modern professionals, utopia would simply be a commuter train completely free of lawyers shouting aggressively into their cell phones.
Right, a highly specific and entirely understandable dream.
Very much so. But an epistemocracy is vastly different. This would be a society governed not by the assertion of accumulated knowledge, but entirely from the basis of an acute awareness of ignorance. In this society, anyone holding a position of systemic power, anyone of rank, must be an epistemocrat.
Right. Instead of the assertive idiot leading the charge, the people in charge would be the ones who agonize over the downstream consequences of their policies, the ones who are terrified of the variables they cannot see.
It sounds like an incredibly stable, safe way to run a world. I mean, you would have a government that never rushes headlong into a disastrous war, never implements sweeping, irreversible economic policies without massive, carefully considered hesitation and built-in fail-safes.
It sounds wonderful.
But the fatal flaw of this utopia is admitted almost immediately. It is impossible to achieve in reality.
Yeah, it falls apart.
You cannot assert authority or maintain leadership over a large population by constantly leading with your own fallibility. The masses fundamentally require the illusion of knowledge, and we trace this directly back to evolutionary biology.
The biological reality is stark. Throughout human history, the survival advantages of being integrated into a cohesive, synchronized group have almost universally outweighed the disadvantages of being isolated. And here is the brutal part. That remains true even if the group is marching in the wrong direction.
Okay, let me push back on that because that runs counter to everything we were taught about rational self-interest. If following the confident idiot leads the tribe off a cliff or into a barren desert, evolutionary mechanics should ruthlessly select against the followers. The people who blindly follow bad confidence should be wiped out, and the cautious skeptics who break away should survive. Why didn't that happen?
Because the environment of our ancestors was relentlessly hostile. And the immediate threats were predators and starvation, not abstract policy failures. An isolated human, no matter how perfectly rational or epistemically sound their individual map of the world was highly vulnerable to predation.
You needed the numbers.
You needed the tribe to hunt large game, to maintain watches at night, to share scarce resources. Therefore, the primary evolutionary imperative was maintaining group cohesion. And what is the most efficient mechanism for generating rapid group cohesion?
Unwavering confidence.
Yes. When the tribe is starving and facing a fork in the road, the individual who points definitively and says the water is absolutely down that path galvanizes the group to move. Even if they are wrong 50% of the times they are right, the group survives together.
Whereas the skeptic,
the individual who stands at the fork saying, well, based on the incomplete data, there is a 40% probability of water down the left path, but we must acknowledge the margins of error, induces paralysis. Paralysis in the ancestral environment meant death. We are the genetic descendants of the primates who followed the assertive idiot. Our neurobiology is hardwired to crave the soothing balm of certainty and to align with confidence, completely independent of accuracy.
that explains so much of our modern political and corporate landscape. We just have this deep-seated biological glitch. And there is a terrifying social pathology mentioned here, too. The phenomenon of psychopaths easily rallying massive followings.
Oh, yeah.
A psychopath is uniquely equipped to project absolute, unbending confidence because they literally lack the neurological mechanisms for empathy and self-doubt that cause hesitation in normal humans. They don't feel the agonizing weight of potential failure.
No, they don't.
And because they project zero hesitation, people instinctively flock to them, interpreting their pathology as strong leadership. It's crazy. So if our own biology is actively working against the establishment of an epistemocracy, how do we ever achieve any level of reliable functional knowledge?
This is where we transition from the philosophical mindset of Montaigne to the practical operational tools developed by later modern philosophy. We need a mechanism to navigate our own biological craving for certainty. And the most powerful tool for this is the concept of the black swan asymmetry.
The black swan asymmetry. Okay, let's break the mechanics of this down. The foundational idea is that certainty is not impossible, but it is strictly unidirectional.
Right.
You can be absolutely mathematically certain about what is wrong, which is the process of disconfirmation, but you can never be absolutely certain about what you believe is right, which is confirmation.
This concept is the bedrock of Karl Popper's philosophy of science. The classic illustrative example that gives the asymmetry its name involves the observation of swans. Imagine you hold a hypothesis. All swans are white. You can go out into the world and observe 10,000 white swans. You can observe 1,000,000 white swans over 10 years. Have you proven that your statement is an absolute truth?
No, you've just seen a lot of white swans.
Exactly. You have merely confirmed that in 1,000,000 instances, you haven't seen a non-white swan yet. The confirmation is additive, but it is never definitive. However, the moment you travel to Australia and observe a single solitary black swan, the entire paradigm shifts. With that one observation, you can be dead certain that the statement, all swans are white, is entirely false. Disconfirmation is a solid, unbreakable wall. Confirmation is just a temporary working hypothesis waiting to be shattered.
So discovering what is false provides us with hard, durable knowledge, whereas trying to build an empire on what we think is true is like building on sand.
That is the essence of Popper's falsification. A theory only has scientific value if there is a conceivable way to prove it wrong. Progress in human knowledge does not come from compiling massive mountains of evidence to prove ourselves right. It comes from ruthlessly, systematically trying to destroy our own theories and seeing what is robust enough to survive the attack.
But there is this incredible, highly ironic anecdote about Karl Popper himself. He is the architect of this rigorous framework of self-doubt and skepticism, yet he apparently wrote and spoke with an incredibly aggressive, dogmatic, almost authoritarian tone.
He was notoriously difficult.
Yeah. Someone once challenged him with a brilliant meta-level trap. They asked him if one could falsify falsification. Essentially, can you take your own aggressive skepticism and apply it to your core theory of skepticism?
It is a stunning piece of intellectual judo. It forces the recursive loop onto the creator of the loop.
And how does Popper, the great champion of recognizing human fallibility, handle having his certainty questioned? He threw the students out of his lectures.
Yeah, he kicked them out.
He was completely intolerant of questions that challenged his core dogma. It's hilariously hypocritical. He is ferociously dogmatic about the absolute necessity of being anti-dogmatic. It is like meeting a fiercely militant pacifist who is entirely willing to assault you physically to demonstrate how deeply they value peace.
That's exactly what it's like.
So if the man who wrote the mathematical rules for doubt couldn't handle practicing it, how are we supposed to apply this asymmetry in our daily lives without becoming paralyzed by our inability to know anything for sure?
Well, Popper's personal failure to embody his own philosophy actually proves the point about how incredibly powerful our biological drive for certainty is. Even the greatest mind dedicated to doubt couldn't override his own ego in real time. But your question about practical application is vital. The asymmetry is not designed to cause paralysis. It is designed to optimize action. If you deeply internalize that you can only ever be certain about what is flawed, your daily decision-making shifts from a process of seeking perfection to a process of elimination. You stop looking for the perfect investment that guarantees a return because confirmation is an illusion. Instead, you actively hunt for fatal flaws in every investment, and you eliminate the ones with hidden systemic risks.
You're trying to break the idea before you commit to it.
Exactly. You don't try to prove your marketing strategy will definitely work. You try to imagine the precise conditions under which it will catastrophically fail. If you can't find the fatal flaw, you move forward. But you move forward tentatively, always ready to pivot. You expend your energy stress testing your beliefs rather than blindly defending them.
That reframing is incredibly useful. We aren't hunting for the absolute truth. We are just trying to actively hunt down and eliminate our errors. However, the inability to handle doubt, this relentless thirst for positive confirmation, goes much deeper than just social habits or ego. It is hardwired into how our brains process the flow of time itself. Which brings us to a psychological phenomenon that fundamentally shapes our reality: future blindness.
We are shifting here from the epistemology of facts to the epistemology of time. There's a profound qualitative difference in the texture of the past compared to the texture of the future. The past is fixed, documented, and feels solid. The future is an unformed cloud of probabilities. Yet most adults, wrapped up in the relentless minutiae of daily existence, paying mortgages, navigating traffic, meeting deadlines, completely ignore this difference in texture.
We operate under the delusion that the future is just going to be an exact, deterministic projection of the past. We treat tomorrow as if it is simply yesterday with a different date stamped on it. If that were actually true, if the future was a clean, linear extension of the past, we would know our exact day of death with the exact same mundane precision that we know our date of birth.
Right, but we don't.
We obviously don't, because the future is heavily contaminated by chance, and there is a striking observation in the source here. Chance is too fuzzy for us to be a category by itself. Our cognitive machinery literally cannot perform the mental operation of grasping a reality governed by true, formless chance.
It is a severe limitation in our rendering software. When you try to visualize tomorrow, your brain does not conjure a blank void filled with shifting probability matrices. That requires way too much computational power.
Right. Our browns are lazy.
They are highly efficient, which means lazy, yes. Instead, your brain takes a high-resolution snapshot of yesterday, tweaks a few superficial variables, like the weather or what you plan to eat for lunch, and presents that edited image to you as the future. We possess a massive structural blind spot regarding the role of randomness. We don't frame our thoughts about tomorrow in terms of what we thought about yesterday on the day before yesterday.
Okay, let's untangle that specific phrasing because it is a bit of a cognitive maze. What we thought about yesterday on the day before yesterday?
Let's map it to a timeline. Think about last Friday. On Thursday, you constructed a mental model of how Friday would unfold. You made predictions. Now it is Tuesday. When you reflect back on Friday, do you take the time to evaluate the delta between your Thursday predictions and the actual Friday reality?
Oh, never.
Do you track your error rate? Almost never. Because we systematically fail to introspect on the gap between our past predictions and the actual outcomes, we never learn how laughably bad we are at forecasting. We just keep confidently projecting tomorrow as another version of yesterday, entirely oblivious to our abysmal track record.
To really drive home how deeply ingrained and almost comical this arrogance is, we are given a thought experiment set at the Bronx Zoo. Imagine you are standing in the primate house. You are watching the monkeys and apes going about their social routines, grooming each other, squabbling over territory, and you see a crowd of human tourists standing on the other side of the glass, pointing and laughing at them. We laugh because we view the primates as a lower, simpler, almost cartoonish caricature of ourselves. We feel vastly superior to their cognitive limits. But then we are asked to imagine a higher-level species, a truly wise, vastly more advanced intelligence observing this entire scene from above. What is their reaction?
They are laughing at us, laughing at the primate.
Exactly. A higher intelligence would look at us, standing there in our cargo shorts, holding our smartphones, utterly convinced that we sit at the absolute pinnacle of universal understanding, completely blind to our own massive cognitive limitations, and they would find our arrogance hilarious.
A very humbling image.
Very. The tourists laughing at the apes cannot even conceptualize a being looking down on them with that same sense of amused superiority. If they could hold that concept in their minds, the laughter would die in their throats, replaced by a profound sense of self-pity and humility. We constantly look backward at humanity from 300 years ago and laugh at their medical use of leeches or their bizarre superstitions, yet we entirely fail to realize that 300 years from now, our descendants will look back at our current certainties and laugh just as hard.
This cognitive failure is diagnosed as a lack of recursive or second-order thinking. First-order thinking is linear and flat. I believe X is true. Second-order recursive thinking introduces a meta layer. I am aware that I believe X is true, and I am actively considering how an outside observer might evaluate the validity of me believing X.
That's a lot of layers.
It is, and we are terrible at maintaining this meta layer. And a very provocative analogy is drawn here, comparing this specific temporal limitation to the cognitive mechanics of autism.
Yes, the analogy to autism and what cognitive scientists refer to as mind blindness. How exactly does this map onto our inability to view the future?
It maps onto the inability to dynamically shift perspectives. Individuals on the autism spectrum can frequently possess staggering levels of technical, mathematical, or spatial intelligence, but they often encounter severe friction in social interactions. Psychologically, this friction often stems from an impaired ability to seamlessly project themselves into the mental state of another person, to view the world from a standpoint outside their own immediate subjective experience. They struggle to execute complex, recursive mental operations. The classic recursive loop is, he knows that I don't know that I know.
Just trying to hold that sentence in your working memory, he knows that I don't know that I know, feels like your brain is trying to run software it wasn't designed for. Let's break that loop down into concrete steps.
Okay, let's run a game theory scenario.
Yeah.
Imagine we're sitting at a table. I have a box in front of me, and I know exactly what is inside it. You do not know what is inside it. That is level 1, basic information asymmetry.
All right, simple enough.
Level 2 requires me to model your mind. I know that you are ignorant of the box's contents. Level 3 requires you to model my model of your mind. You know that I am fully aware of your ignorance.
Okay, my brain is starting to hurt.
And that's exactly the point. This multi-layered, recursive tracking of internal mental states is the absolute foundation of complex human social interaction. It's what allows for empathy, strategic deception, negotiation, and humor. Mind blindness is the friction in tracking these states in the present moment. The argument here is that humanity, as an entire species, suffers from an identical friction when dealing with time.
Wow.
We suffer from future blindness. We're completely incapable of dynamically positioning ourselves with respect to a future observer. We cannot imagine the future historian looking back and evaluating our present actions. We are perpetually trapped within the immediate subjective perception of our current moment.
While the cognitive science of recursive loops is fascinating, I want to pull this out of the theoretical realm and see how it hits the pavement. If chance is too fuzzy for our brains to process and we are blindly projecting tomorrow as just another yesterday without any second-order awareness, how does this actually manifest in the decisions we make in our daily lives?
It manifests constantly and often painfully. While cognitive scientists might not frequently use the exact phrase future blindness, there is a massive, robust body of literature that meticulously documents our chronic systemic errors in prediction. And it exists in a field that impacts every single person, the psychology of happiness.
This is where the theory gets uncomfortably relatable. We move from abstract philosophical tower dwelling straight to the fluorescent lights of a car dealership.
Yeah, exactly.
We are given the archetype of buying a new car. Let's really take this picture. You are standing on the lot looking at this incredible new vehicle. You don't just see a mode of transportation. Your brain builds an elaborate future-facing narrative. You convince yourself that acquiring this object is going to fundamentally alter the baseline of your existence.
You see a whole new you.
You do. You imagine pulling up to a traffic light, and you can vividly feel the elevated social status as people admire the car. You imagine your grueling, soul-crushing daily commute suddenly transforming into a serene oasis. You specifically picture how heavy the doors feel, how insulated the cabin is from the road noise, and you see yourself gliding down the highway at sunset, listening to the intricate piano runs of Rachmaninoff's nocturnes in perfect, isolated bliss. You believe with absolute, unwavering conviction that this car is going to elevate you to a permanently higher plateau of daily contentment.
The key phrase there is permanently higher plateau. That is the core neurological delusion.
Right. Because what actually happens, the fatal flaw in your entire predictive model is that you completely delete your own historical data. You forget that the last time you bought a new car, you generated the exact same intoxicating narrative. And what is the status of that last car now?
It's just a car.
The thrill evaporated. The new car smell faded. The engine noise became normal. It degraded from a magical vessel of status into just a utility object that gets you to work. The psychological reality is that just a few short weeks after you drive this new Rachmaninoff playing machine off the lot, the sensory novelty will wear off, and your emotional state will rapidly revert to its initial baseline condition.
The hedonic treadmill.
Yes. If you possessed the recursive ability to accurately predict this emotional decay, if you weren't suffering from acute future blindness, you probably wouldn't sign the financing papers, you wouldn't take on the debt. It would cost you almost no computational energy to simply introspect and realize this. Yet we fall into this exact same predictive trap over and over again for our entire lives.
And the academic terminology for this trap is well defined. Danny Kahneman refers to the flawed projection of future joy as anticipated utility. Dan Gilbert's research focuses on effective forecasting. We are chronically, predictably abysmal at forecasting our own affective emotional states over time. And it is vital to understand that this blindness applies to the negative spectrum just as heavily as the positive. We dramatically overestimate the duration and the intensity of future misfortunes.
We assume the bad things are going to permanently break us.
Yes. You imagine a scenario where you lose your job, or you suffer a significant financial blow, and your predictive machinery tells you that this event will be absolutely devastating, a permanent, suffocating dark cloud over the rest of your life. But the data shows you are almost certainly wrong.
You bounce back.
You will experience an acute sting, absolutely. But your psychological immune system will kick in and you will adapt. You'll habituate to the misfortune at roughly the same speed you habituate to the luxury of the new car. The despair will not be as deep, nor will it last nearly as long as your future blind brain predicts.
Think about the exercise equipment industry. It is an entire economic sector built almost exclusively on future blindness.
Oh, totally.
You buy a highly expensive, incredibly complex stationary bike. You aren't buying metal and gears. You are purchasing a vivid projection of a permanently fit, highly disciplined, energetic, future version of yourself. You envision waking up at 5 a.m. every single morning, filled with joy, pedaling away. Fast forward 3 months, that bike is now functioning as a very expensive, very heavy clothes rack in the corner of your bedroom, draped in laundry.
We've all been there.
We have. The future projection was an illusion. So we have to ask the ultimate why question here. Why would evolutionary biology saddle us with a brain that systematically lies to us? Why are we wired to constantly mispredict what will actually make us happy or sad?
The evolutionary rationale is fascinating, and it is largely drawn from the theories of evolutionary biologist Robert Trevers. Trevers suggests that this chronic self-deception is not a bug. It is a highly optimized feature. It serves a vital survival purpose. Consider the alternative. What if your brain was perfectly rational? What if you knew with absolute certainty that the intense joy of acquiring the new car, securing the promotion, or building the larger shelter would completely evaporate in 30 days, leaving you feeling exactly the same as you do right now? Would you ever exert the massive caloric energy required to strive for anything?
I mean, probably not.
Exactly. Would you take the physical and social risks necessary to accumulate resources, elevate your status in the tribe, or attract a mate? Probably not. You would recognize the hedonic treadmill for what it is, and you would just sit passively under a tree until you starved.
So the illusion of permanent happiness is the evolutionary carrot dangling on the stick, forcing us to keep pulling the cart forward.
Precisely. It generates the necessary motivational drive to perform acts that are crucial for the survival and expansion of the species. On the flip side, the exaggerated catastrophic fear of future pain prevents us from taking unnecessary, immediate physical risks that could result in death or injury. We are biologically required to fool ourselves a little bit. The self-deception creates a forward-leaning orientation that drives action.
But there is a massive catch to this biological programming. The self-deception is highly specialized. It only functions properly within its natural domain.
Right. In the ancestral environment, the African savanna fearing the immediate, highly vivid danger of a physical predator, or striving for the immediate, vivid reward of a high-calorie food source, was a perfectly calibrated survival strategy. The critical failure occurs when we drag this ancient, highly specific hardware into the wildly complex, abstract modern world. Outside of its natural domain, our effective forecasting fails us catastrophically.
How does that failure manifest in modern risks?
It manifests as a fatal mismatch in risk assessment. Because our internal alarm systems are tuned exclusively to immediate, vivid, visceral stimuli, we do not naturally fear modern, non-vivid, abstract, or delayed risks. For example, humans struggle to generate a visceral, paralyzing fear of slow-moving environmental degradation because climate change doesn't leap out of the bushes with bared teeth.
It's too slow.
It's too abstract. We don't possess a natural pulse-pounding fear of long-term investment security risks or compounding debt because a red number fluctuating on a digital screen doesn't trigger the ancient survival circuits in our amygdala. Our evolutionary self-deception hyper-focuses us on the wrong things, like the status of a new car, while leaving us entirely blind to the actual systemic long-term dangers of the modern environment.
That is a deeply unsettling realization. We are highly motivated by mirages, and we are blissfully numb to the actual cliffs we are walking toward. And just when you think this deep dive has sufficiently dismantled our confidence by proving how blind we are to the future, the concept pivots sharply backward. It says essentially, you accept that you cannot know the future. Fine. You also cannot know the past.
Yeah, you get hit from both sides.
And to illustrate this historical blindness, we are introduced to a character from Greek mythology.
We are introduced to Helenus from Homer's Iliad. It is a brilliant literary framing device for the problem of historical knowledge.
Let's look at Helenus. He is the son of King Priam and Queen Hecuba of Troy, and he's universally described as the cleverest, most perceptive man in the Trojan army. Now, there is a great piece of irony noted here. Under torture, Helenus actually revealed to the Achaeans the specific prophecies required to capture Troy. He apparently possessed all this foresight, but somehow failed to predict his own capture and torture.
A bit of an oversight on his part.
Just a little bit. But his truly unique skill, the thing that set him apart from a standard mythological seer, wasn't his ability to see the future. Helenus possessed a much stranger, much more profound ability. He was able to predict the past backward.
Right.
He could look at an event and reconstruct the precise historical pathway that led to it without having been given any prior details.
He was a reverse prophet. And the core argument here is that if humanity is ever going to truly scientifically understand history, we desperately need a species of historians with the exact abilities of Helenus, because our current ability to reconstruct the causal chains of the past is fundamentally mathematically flawed. To demonstrate exactly why it is flawed, we are presented with a thought experiment developed by two quantitative finance experts, Aaron Brown and Paul Wilmot.
The melting ice cube. This is the specific concept that completely shattered my understanding of how we write history. We need to walk through this very carefully. The experiment outlines two distinct opposing mental operations. Operation 1 is the forward process. Imagine a perfectly formed square ice cube sitting on a table. Let's make it specific. It's sitting on a green felt poker table in a room with a set temperature, and you and I are going to sit down and play poker for the next 2 hours. Your task is to use all available science to envision the exact shape and dimensions of the puddle of water that this ice cube will melt into over those 2 hours. That is Operation 1.
Got it.
Then we have Operation 2, the backward process. In this scenario, you walk into a completely empty room and you observe a puddle of water on the floor. Your task is to look at that puddle and reconstruct in your mind's eye the exact shape, size, and location of the ice cube that it used to be.
And we must include the crucial complicating caveat to Operation 2. You have to deeply consider the possibility that the puddle you are looking at might not have originated from an ice cube at all. A janitor could have spilled a bucket, a pipe in the ceiling could have leaked, someone could have dropped a glass of water.
Right. So we are comparing these two mental operations. The argument is that the second operation, the backward process, is not just slightly harder, but exponentially, infinitely harder. Why?
It comes down to the fundamental physics and mechanics of the systems involved. Operation 1, the forward process, calculating the melt from the ice cube to the puddle, is essentially an engineering and thermodynamics problem. If you possess the correct models of physics, the ambient room temperature, the thermal conductivity, the green felt, the humidity, and you have enough computational power, you could predict with incredible precision exactly how that ice cube will collapse into a puddle.
Because it's linear.
Yes. It is a deterministic process moving from a highly specific, known starting state to a determined outcome.
But the backward process is a totally different game.
The backward process is an entirely different beast because it deals with information loss. When you look at the puddle on the floor, you are looking at a final, degraded end state. From that single end state, there are mathematically infinite possible starting states, infinite possible ice cubes of wildly different shapes, spheres, jagged blocks, small cubes, large cubes could have all melted at different rates to form that exact same puddle. Or, as we noted, the starting state might not have involved ice at all.
There's no way to know.
None. It is mathematically impossible to deduce the single correct historical starting point from the degraded end result. Information has been irreversibly lost to entropy. The forward process is what we utilize in physics, engineering, and chemistry. The backward process is what we are forced to use in the study of history. History is a non-repeatable, non-experimental discipline. You cannot run the tape of the universe backward to check your work.
The metaphor used here perfectly captures this. The limitations that prevent us from unfrying an egg also prevent us from reverse engineering history.
Yeah.
You can't unscramble the proteins. Wait, if looking backward is functionally the equivalent of staring at a puddle on the floor and just randomly guessing which of an infinite number of possible ice cubes created it, does that mean every historical account we've ever read, every textbook we studied in school, is essentially a piece of fiction constructed from staring at water on the floor?
To a very large and uncomfortable extent, yes. We look at a massive historical event. Let's take World War I as our puddle. Historians look at the devastation and attempt to construct a neat, linear, comprehensible narrative of the ice cube that caused it. They point confidently to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. But that is merely selecting one highly visible ice cube out of an infinite array of complex, interacting, invisible variables, economic pressures, secret treaties, technological shifts, individual neuroses of leaders. To grasp just how impossible it is to isolate the true historical cause, we have to scale the ice cube problem up. We move from a simple thermodynamic block of ice to the ultimate representation of complex, nonlinear systems.
It's a butterfly effect.
Exactly. We are injecting extreme nonlinearity into the forward-backward problem.
I see the visual backdrop has shifted again. We had the stone study, and while we were discussing the thermodynamics of the ice cube, there was a time lapse of ice melting on green felt running behind you. But now it is shifting into this massive, swirling, chaotic global weather pattern.
It's mesmerizing, isn't it?
It is. The butterfly effect is the classic paradigm for chaos theory, often called the butterfly in India example. The core concept is that a microscopic input in a highly complex, nonlinear system can cascade into massive, seemingly non-random macro results. A single butterfly flapping its wings in New Delhi alters the air pressure slightly, which compounds over time and space, becoming the definitive mechanical cause of a massive hurricane in North Carolina 3 years later.
Now, let's apply our forward and backward operations to the butterfly. The forward process tracing the causal chain from the butterfly in New Delhi to the hurricane in North Carolina is computationally staggering, requiring billions of atmospheric calculations. But conceptually, it is still linear physics. It is a direct chain of cause and effect moving forward in time.
But the backward process?
The backward process is not just difficult. It is conceptually and physically impossible. Given the observation of a massive hurricane hitting North Carolina today, could you ever, with infinite computing power, trace the causal chain backward through the atmosphere to discover that it was initiated by that specific butterfly in New Delhi 3 years ago?
No way.
No, because there are billions and billions of microscopic events occurring simultaneously. The cause could have been the butterfly. It could have been a wild dog sneezing in the Australian outback. It could have been a man coughing in a market in Timbuktu. Reversing the causal chain from the macro event back to the specific, true micro cause is totally beyond the reach of human capability or computation.
And there is a sharp critique here of how pop culture completely misunderstands this dynamic. It highlights a specific French film titled Happenstance, or The Beating of a Butterfly's Wings, directed by Laurent Ferraud. The entire premise and message of this movie was to encourage the audience to become hyper-aware of the tiny, seemingly insignificant details that might drastically alter the trajectory of their lives. The romantic idea is, hey, if a single flower petal falling on the sidewalk catches your eye, causes you to turn your head, and makes her bump into your soulmate, you need to pay extreme attention to every falling petal. But the argument made here is that this romantic notion is a disastrous, maddening confusion of the backward process.
It is a profound misunderstanding of the mathematics of reality. The filmmaker and the audiences who found it profound failed to realize they were attempting to play the backward game moving forward. There were literally trillions of these microscopic, insignificant events occurring in the immediate vicinity of a single human being over the course of an average day. Trillions of petals falling, cups clinking, breezes blowing, strangers glancing.
Too much data.
You cannot possibly monitor all of them, calculate their compounding effects, and use that data to strategically navigate your life. Attempting to focus on microvariables as a strategy for living is a one-way ticket to cognitive overload and madness.
To really hammer home the impossibility of this reverse engineering, we are given an example that strips away the romanticism of falling petals and the overwhelming complexity of global weather. It uses something incredibly mundane and highly controlled, a simple computer spreadsheet.
The tent map example. This is an incredibly elegant way to strip away the noise of the physical world and look at the pure underlying mathematics of unknowledge. Imagine a simple program running on a standard personal computer. This program generates a sequence of numbers, a succession of data points. We can view this sequence of numbers as a simulated history. To the naked eye looking at the spreadsheet, the sequence of numbers appears completely, wildly random. There is no discernible pattern. But the sequence is not random at all. It is generated by a very simple, one-line, nonlinear equation.
Okay, let's play the forward and backward game with this equation. If you hand me that one-line equation, I can plug a starting number into it, and I can perfectly deterministically calculate the next 1,000 numbers in the sequence.
Yeah.
That is the forward process. It's just turning the crank on the math.
Precisely. The forward generation is perfectly deterministic and trivial to execute. But now, we invert the game. I refuse to give you the equation. I only hand you the final list of 1,000 numbers. I tell you, this sequence was generated by a simple one-line formula. Find the formula.
Which you can't do.
It is practically impossible for a human being or even a standard computer to reverse engineer that specific generative equation just by looking at the resulting data points. And you have to realize the scale of the metaphor here. We're talking about a tiny handful of clean data points generated by a single, simple mathematical line, not the billions of messy, simultaneous interacting variables that constitute the actual history of human civilization.
If we can't even reverse engineer a one-line spreadsheet formula, the conclusion we have to draw about history is devastating. The argument is that even if the history of the universe was perfectly non-random, even if there was a master deterministic equation of the world dictating every single event, because we are computationally incapable of reverse engineering that equation from the events we observe, we are forced to treat the world as if it is fundamentally random.
Exactly.
This is why historians are warned to stay far, far away from concepts like chaos theory and deterministic chaos, except to use them as proof of the limits of what they cannot know.
This leads directly to a massive fundamental problem of practical philosophy. In the realm of abstract theory, randomness might be an intrinsic, irreducible property of the quantum universe, or the universe might just be a vastly complex, deterministic clockwork machine. But in the realm of daily practice, for human beings trying to navigate reality and make decisions, the distinction is entirely meaningless. The text states boldly, randomness, in practice, is incomplete information. It is defined simply as opacity.
Opacity. The gears of the clock are just hidden behind an opaque wall.
Yes. There's a recount of the intense frustration the author feels at academic conferences. Philosophers and mathematicians constantly corner him to debate whether the randomness he writes about is ontic, true randomness, meaning the universe is fundamentally unpredictable at a quantum level, or epistemic, deterministic chaos, meaning the universe is predictable, but the calculations are just too complex for our current computers.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. The author's response is brilliant because it aggressively dismisses the entire theoretical debate. He argues that there's absolutely no functional difference in practice because the difference is mathematical, not practical. To illustrate this, he provides a stunningly simple, clarifying analogy.
The ultrasound analogy. Let's look closely at this because it cuts right through the academic jargon. Imagine a pregnant woman walking down the street. To an outside observer sitting on a park bench, the biological sex of her unborn child is a matter of pure statistical randomness. It is a 50-50 probability, a coin flip. The observer cannot predict it. But to her obstetrician, who performed an ultrasound that morning and looked directly inside the womb, the sex of the child is not a random probability at all. It is a known, definitive, deterministic fact. The exact same biological reality is random to one person and deterministic to another, based entirely on who holds the information.
Randomness is fundamentally incomplete information. That sentence is the absolute core of the argument. To the outside observer on the bench, the perceived randomness of the baby's sex is nothing more than a lack of access to the ultrasound data. It is a deficit of knowledge, not a property of the universe. The author adds a very sharp, practical critique of his academic detractors here.
What does he say?
He suggests that the mere fact that these philosophers spend their lives obsessing over the theoretical distinction between true randomness and deterministic chaos is proof that they have never actually had to make a meaningful, high-stakes decision under conditions of true uncertainty in the real world. Because when you are in the trenches, when you are managing a crisis, investing capital, or leading a team, the theoretical, philosophical origin of the fog surrounding you does not matter. The only thing that matters is that you are blind and you have to act anyway.
If randomness is just unknowledge, then are we saying that the universe is actually a giant, predictable mechanical clock and we are just too blind to see the gears?
Well, if we connect this back to the broader thesis, the point isn't to firmly declare that the universe is a deterministic clock. The point is to declare that it absolutely does not matter if it's a clock or a cosmic game of quantum dice. Because our biological and computational minds are vastly too limited to perceive the gears and vastly too weak to calculate the trajectories of the dice, the functional lived result for human beings is identical. We exist in a fundamentally opaque environment where surface appearances and linear narratives constantly deceive us.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most controversial paradigm shift of this deep dive. If the world is fundamentally opaque, if we mathematically cannot reverse engineer the puddle to find the ice cube, what on earth are we supposed to do with the study of history? We are introduced to a concept called the trap of history.
It is framed as a trap, precisely because our brains are biologically hardwired to seek out narratives. We possess a deep psychological hunger for the puddle to make sense. We desperately want to locate the single ice cube. But the approach suggested here is a radical departure from how we normally engage with the past. We are told to view history strictly as a museum.
A museum.
Yeah, it is a repository of the past, a place to wander through and taste the charm of olden days. It functions as a mirror for our own personal narratives, not as a textbook of causal laws.
There is a surprising amount of candor here regarding the author's own habits. He openly admits to a deep love of history. He specifically points out his fondness for ancient literary history. He lists the heavyweights he continually rereads, which he notes is the ultimate test of whether a book is actually good authors, like Plutarch, Livy, Suetonius, Diodorus Siculus, Edward Gibbon, Thomas Carlyle, Ernest Renan, and Jules Michelet.
A very heavy reading list.
Very heavy. He reads these massive historical volumes to build his own internal narrative, to romantically connect with his complex Eastern Mediterranean heritage. But he attaches a massive, non-negotiable caveat to this reading list.
The caveat is the key to the entire methodology. He explicitly acknowledges that the accounts written by Livy or Plutarch are patently substandard when judged against modern scientific or empirical rigor. They are heavily anecdotal, they are infused with mythology, and they invent dialogue. But, and this is the crucial distinction, he knows this while he's reading them. He's not deceived. He engages with these texts fully aware of their empirical flaws, which renders his use of them harmless.
He argues that history is wonderful for the emotional thrill and for the personal narrative, strictly provided it remains a harmless narrative. He also notes we can extract negative confirmation from history, which connects back to Popper's Black Swan.
Yeah.
Negative confirmation is invaluable. For example, reading history can definitively, empirically demonstrate that massive, seemingly invincible empires eventually collapse. That is a solid negative confirmation of the hypothesis that empires can last forever. But the severe warning is that history is never a place to construct positive theories or to derive general causal knowledge in an attempt to predict the future. The moment you attempt to extract predictive laws from the Roman Empire to apply to tomorrow, you invite a cascade of disastrous illusions.
To navigate this trap safely, the text resurrects a highly obscure ancient methodology from the empiric school of medicine, specifically pointing to a thinker named Menodotus of Nicomedia. This approach is called epillogism.
Epillogism.
Right.
How exactly does this function in practice?
Epillogism is the extreme discipline of observing history without theorizing from it. It is a state of pure observation. It means you read the historical accounts, you gather the vast enumerations of events, and you do not look down on the unscientific anecdotes. You respect established custom and tradition, using them as a default basis for your own actions simply because they have survived the brutal filter of time.
Okay, but
and this is the unbreakable rule of epillogism, you do not draw causal links. You do not look at event A, like a tax policy in Rome, and event B, a military defeat, and confidently declare that A caused B. You do not attempt to reverse engineer the impossibly complex machinery of the past, and you absolutely do not attempt to construct grand scientific frameworks based on your imagined causal links.
there's a quote here from baseball legend Yogi Berra that brilliantly and hilariously captures the essence of this complex ancient philosophy. You can observe a lot by just watching.
It's perfect.
That is epillogism. Just watch the game. Stop trying to solve the underlying physics equation of the pitch. Just look at the sequence of events as they unfold.
But it must be noted that this approach is violently opposed to the standard methodology of professional historians. Most historians view their primary function not as enumeration, but as the active discovery of cause. The text singles out E.H. Carr, pointing to his highly influential book, What is History?, noting that Carr explicitly defines the pursuit of causation as the central, defining duty of a historian. This obsession with cause goes all the way back to Herodotus, known as the father of history, who explicitly stated his goal was to provide the cause for the conflicts between the Greeks and the barbarians.
The critique doesn't stop with historians. It lumps in massive, world-altering theoreticians like Ibn Khaldun, Karl Marx, and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. It argues that all of these thinkers fell into the exact same trap. They refuse to accept history as a simple enumeration of opaque accounts. They attempted to transform history into a predictive, hard science and failed. And the argument implies that the harder they tried to force a causal predictive framework onto the chaos of human events, the more ideological damage they caused. We are constantly plagued by the narrative fallacy, this deep biological need to force a coherent, linear story onto events that are fundamentally chaotic and nonlinear.
To illustrate the sheer danger of falling for the narrative fallacy and the desperate pursuit of causation, we are given two extremely important footnotes that detail massive, common traps people fall into when analyzing history. The first is the trap of naive analogies.
This is a trap we see on the news every single day. The constant, breathless comparison between the modern United States and ancient Rome. Pundits constantly point to the debasement of Roman currency or the corruption of the Senate to warn about the impending decline and fall of the U.S. Military strategists study the Punic Wars and the destruction of Carthage to justify modern geopolitical maneuvering. Why is this analogy considered fundamentally invalid?
It is an error of comparing completely different scales of complexity. The argument states that we must exercise extreme caution when attempting to transpose knowledge from a Type 1 environment to a Type 2 environment.
What's the difference?
Antiquity, relatively speaking, was a Type 1 environment. It was simpler, slower, and had fewer interconnected nodes. The modern world is a Type 2 environment. It is an infinitely more intricate, hyper-connected web of global supply chains, instantaneous digital communication, algorithmic trading, and rapid technological shifts. Attempting to map the political causality of a slow-moving agrarian empire onto the hyperkinetic geopolitics of the 21st century is like trying to use the rules of checkers to win a game of 3D chess. The board is different, the pieces move differently, and the causality simply does not translate.
The second historical trap detailed in the footnotes is even more of a psychological mindbender. It is referred to as the Casanova argument, and it is applied to one of the most significant realities of our time, the absence of a global nuclear war since 1945.
This is a devastating masterclass in exposing survivorship bias. Many modern historians, political scientists, and policymakers look at the long period of relative peace since the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they attempt to derive firm causal conclusions about why we haven't annihilated ourselves. They point to the strategic doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or the diplomatic framework of the United Nations, or the skill of specific leaders during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and they declare these policies are the definitive cause of our continued safety.
Which sounds reasonable until you hear the counterargument.
Exactly. But the Casanova argument destroys this logic. It states that it is fundamentally mathematically invalid to derive a cause from this absence of destruction. Why? Because if a global nuclear war had taken place, we would not be sitting here having a deep dive about it. Our very existence, our ability to act as observers of the past, is entirely conditioned on the absence of that catastrophic event.
So we are the survivors of a multi-generational game of Russian roulette. We are looking back at the last 80 years of pulling the trigger, noting that the gun hasn't gone off, and arrogantly assuming our survival is due to our brilliant geopolitical skill rather than the terrifying possibility that the chamber just happened to be empty on our turn.
It is not a good idea for us to derive a cause when our survival is conditioned on that cause. It is a chillingly logical point. If Casanova survives 1,000 dangerous duels and jealous husbands, he might write a book claiming his survival was due to his unmatched swordsmanship and cunning. But basic probability tells us that out of 1 million reckless adventurers, purely by statistical variance, one of them will survive 1,000 close calls. Casanova isn't necessarily genius, he is just the statistical outlier who lived to write the autobiography. We must consider the possibility that humanity is just Casanova with nuclear weapons.
That concept completely strips away the warm, comforting blanket we get from reading history books. It removes the illusion that the adults are in charge and that they know how the machine works. It leaves you feeling like humanity is just stumbling forward in the dark, occasionally getting lucky. But I have to push back here, because this level of skepticism feels almost nihilistic. If we are explicitly forbidden from drawing causes from historical events, aren't we doomed to repeat the worst of them? We all know the famous Santayana quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." How are we supposed to learn anything of value from the past if we are not allowed to connect the dots between actions and outcomes?
The panic you are feeling is exactly what the text anticipates. But the counterargument is that we have been confidently connecting the dots incorrectly for centuries. We believe we are learning from history. But because we are connecting dots in a highly complex Type 2 environment using flawed Type 1 cognitive hardware, we are actually just drawing false maps. And following a false map with absolute confidence leads you into new, unprecedented disasters much faster than walking carefully in the dark without a map at all.
So we just walk in the dark.
The conclusion is not that we should burn the history books, but that we must radically alter how we read them. It suggests that we may have to wait for an entirely new generation of historians to emerge. A generation of skeptical, empiricist historians who deeply internalize the profound, unbridgeable difference between a forward thermodynamic process and a reverse historical one. Historians who truly understand that you cannot unfry the egg of time.
Just as Karl Popper aggressively attacked people for making dogmatic, scientifically invalid claims about what will happen in the future, the author of this text is attacking modern historians and pundits for making dogmatic, scientifically invalid claims about why things happened in the past. We are told that after relentlessly breaking down our false confidence in both our future forecasting and our historical reverse engineering, there are actually highly practical, robust measures we can take to survive and thrive in this state of opacity. But the author leaves those practical strategies for the next chapter.
It's quite the cliffhanger.
It really is. For us, attempting to digest the profound implications of this text, it is time to synthesize the massive intellectual journey we have been on today. We started in the deafening, arrogant noise of the modern cocktail party, examining the agonizing, invisible humility of the epistemocrat. We traveled back to the quiet, isolated stone tower of Montaigne in 16th century France, discovering that explicitly accepting our cognitive flaws is a far superior form of logic than pretending we are perfectly rational. We stood at the Bronx Zoo and realized that a vastly higher intelligence would find our arrogant certainty about the universe hilarious. We sat in the driver's seat of a brand new car, listening to Rachmaninoff, only to confront the reality that our evolutionary biology actively lies to us about what will bring us lasting happiness, driving us forward on a treadmill of misprediction. And finally, we stared at a simple puddle of water on the floor, confronting the terrifying reality that our history books and our causal narratives are largely fictions, constructed by minds incapable of reverse engineering the complexities of the past.
It is a lot to take in.
It is. Next time you find yourself feeling absolutely, unshakably certain about exactly why a political event happened yesterday, or exactly how a new purchase or a new job is going to permanently elevate your happiness tomorrow, I want you to pause. I want you to remember Montaigne sitting in his tower, looking out over the hills, surrounded by quotes about the limits of human perception. Remember the epistemocrat at the party. Remember that in a world defined by extreme complexity and fundamental opacity, the courage to pause, look at the data, and simply say, I don't know, is the rarest, most intellectually honest, and ultimately most valuable form of courage we possess.
I couldn't agree more.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, a thought that builds directly on everything we've explored today. We discussed the ancient concept of epillogism, the strict discipline of observing world history without aggressively forcing causal links upon it, treating the past as a museum to be visited rather than a physics equation to be solved. What would happen if you took that exact philosophy and applied it to your own life story?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about your own personal history. What if you stopped trying to force a neat, definitive, causal narrative onto your own past? What if you stopped telling yourself, this specific trauma happened so that I could learn this specific lesson, or I am exactly the way I am today strictly because of this one event that happened when I was 20? What if, instead of constantly trying to reverse engineer the puddle of your current self to find the exact ice cubes of your past, you practice personal epillogism? What if you simply allowed your memories to exist as a museum you visit, observing the joy, the pain, and the chaos without feeling the overwhelming pressure to turn your life into a perfectly solved equation? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the limits of knowledge. It has been an absolute privilege to explore this with you. Take care of yourselves, and above all, stay curious.